There's no fucking way that I could do any of this shit to the extent that I do it right now.
Yeah.
If I was what's it called when you have a job? Employed. If I was employed, I was struggling to find the words.
It's been too long.
It's not in his dictionary. Welcome to Proudly Asian, a podcast series that tells bold and proud stories of Asians by Asians. I'm Isabel Wong, a financial journalist who wants to uncover the many Asian stories around us that are waiting to be told. There's never just one way to look at Asians. This podcast will take you through a deep dive into the life stories, struggles, and triumphs of young Asians around the world. On today's episode, we have Chinese-American podcasters Curtis and Lingjie. Curtis is the fifth generation of his family to live in San Francisco. The father of two twin daughters is also a high school biology teacher and the host of the InfatuAsian Podcast. Lingjie is a first-generation Chinese-American living in Flushing, Queens, New York. A full-time stay-at-home dad by choice, he's also the co-host of West Asian Podcast. They join us to talk about all things podcasting. Welcome back to Proudly Asian. Now, this week marks our 52nd episode.
Woo, 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 woo.
Welcome to the Worst Asian Podcast, where one Asian American millennial sits with one unaged, unknown age British lady and one slightly older San Francisco man.
Thanks for the slightly.
So, yeah, on our 52nd episode, we get hijacked at the intro. So, all is good. But that also means 52 weeks of content, which means it's like a year's worth of content. So, woohoo! Yeah,
amazing.
It's worth a celebration.
Congrats, Isabel.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much, guys. Now, to celebrate this very special milestone, I've invited some very special guests out of the US, my podcaster friends who both run their own podcasts to talk about being us podcasters on this episode, the goods and the bads, and what were we really thinking when we were starting our podcast. So we're going to talk all about that. But first of all, welcome to Proudly Asian, Lingjie and Curtis. How have you been?
Hello, Isabel. You all right? Lingjie, you all right?
I'm good. It's really, really early for Curtis, so I guess he's trying to hype himself up.
Trying to get a little hype here, yeah.
What time is it there, Curtis?
7:40 a.m. my time. But we're here for you, Isabel. You know, we wouldn't miss this for the world.
Thank you.
I guess technically I have the best time because I'm at a normal 10:30, 10:40 pace.
It always sucks for Curtis whenever he needs to speak with us online. It's always like 5 a.m., 6 a.m. for him.
I take one for the team. It's all right.
Thank you, Curtis. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah, so it's so nice to have both of you on the show. But before we get into the main conversation, of course, there's this set of questions that I make every single guest on Proudly Asian to answer, just so our listeners can get to know more about you. So why don't we start with talking about the background? Who are you? What are you? Where did you grow up? And tell us about your podcast too. Maybe Curtis, do you want to start first?
Seniority first.
Yeah, I figured. This is an Asian podcast, so we got to go elderly first. Hi, everyone. I'm Curtis. I do the InfatuAsian Podcast out of San Francisco, California. Born and raised here about 4 or 5 generations back. We go into San Francisco, and by day I'm a high school biology teacher, but we're on spring break, so I can sit here at 7:30 in the morning and talk to these folks. But yeah, so I've been doing the podcast about 20 months or so. Almost, it'll be a year in June, so we're getting there.
2 years.
A year.
Oh, sorry, yes. It's early. Let me have some more coffee. Hold on. 2 years in June, and yeah. Other than that, I'm a dad, and yeah, Chinese American.
Cool. And Lingjie?
Hello, my name is Lingjie. I am 36 years old. I don't know why I stopped for a little bit. I wasn't sure if I should say that. Anyways, I'm 36 years old. I live in Flushing, Queens, New York City, the best Chinatown in all of America. come at me if you guys think differently. I am Chinese American, if you can't tell by the name. I was born originally in China, but I moved over to Flushing, Queens, New York City, America, when I was 6 years old, and I have been here ever since. I'm also a father. I am, unlike the two of you, I am currently unemployed, but that is by choice. So I hope you guys don't hold it against me. So that is why I have lots of time to record today.
I mean, we've been joking about how Lingjie sits on bags of cash. So, like, if you don't see him sitting in a chair right now, he's literally sitting on his bags of cash.
Isabel, this is not a chair. This is a throne. Please get your terms correct.
Made of gold.
Pure gold.
And you just
painted
painted
black.
Yes. And yeah, it's so nice to have both of you sitting down because for our listeners' context, we're literally kind of like online friends because we sort of discovered each other's podcast and then we had this like little group chat among ourselves talking about why we started our podcast and stuff like that. And then eventually it became like an ongoing conversation making fun of Lingjie being rich.
Thank you. That's a joke, by the way. If people haven't heard, I am not rich. I'm unemployed. I literally make less money per year than the both of you.
And then for those who listen to the episode that kickstart the whole season 3 of Proudly Asian, you would have listened to the story of Ben. And Ben is also the co-host of West Asian Podcast, which is the same podcast that Lingjie's running. So we got
I apologize for Ben's behavior. I apologize to the listeners. I apologize to anyone that will eventually listen to the episode. I am sorry on his behalf.
I hope your PR team wasn't too busy after the episode released.
They all quit.
The spin control. Yeah, spin control was out of control.
I mean, of course, for this conversation, it's all about being podcaster. So I just want to know from you guys, how did you start your podcast? Maybe this time we can start with Lingjie.
Okay. My podcast, our podcast, is Worst Asian Podcast. That is actually what it's called. So if you search Worst Asian Podcast, you'll find us there. It started off because Ben, my co-host, it was his idea. 100% his idea. Although he does 0% of the work right now, or for the past year and a half. So it's strange how things have turned. But he approached me during the middle of the pandemic, I think, and he said, hey, you want to do a podcast? Actually, he approached me and my friends, and then only I said yes, given that I had more time and I was a fellow podcast addict myself. So I kind of like was weighing to podcast anyways. I kind of had a bit more time on my hand, and it just kind of went from there. As for where the podcast turned to, we wanted to niche down, obviously, because we weren't going to compete with either a full-blown news podcast or like a general commentary podcast, blah, blah, blah. So we niched down, and then it's strange enough because the podcast itself has given us a chance to discuss things about our Asian heritage that we probably didn't discuss as in-depth throughout our whole lives, though that has been maybe the biggest benefit of it so far. And we've been doing it for about a year and a half now. I think that's pretty much it. That's the sum of it, at least.
So Ben came up with the idea.
All his idea.
Wow.
Which is very surprising because if anyone listens to my podcast or a long-time listeners of my podcast will know, they should know Ben doesn't do anything. Ben can barely appear weekly on time. Sometimes we don't even record weekly, although we release weekly. We record every other week and we'll do a double header or triple header. And even if I have to see him twice or 3 times a month, that is a struggle.
Wow.
I wish you had recorded that conversation where he's like, hey, Lingjie, I get this great idea that you're going to do all the work for.
I need to time travel back and then actually tell myself either to not do it or actually put it down on a contract somewhere. But let's do X, Y, and Z.
I need a friend like Lingjie because I literally can just be like, hey, I want to start a business. And then Lingjie is just like, do everything.
And you do everything, yeah.
Yes. And then now Ben has a podcast because he literally just said, hey, I want a podcast. Yeah, so that's how West Asian Podcast started. It started with Ben probably got drunk or high, just saying he wanted a podcast, and then his very hardworking OCD friend just decided to do the rest of the work for him. But what about you, Curtis? Because you're a one-man band.
Yeah. I think for me, same thing. It was kind of like during the pandemic where it's like, okay, we got a little bit of time on our hands, staying at home all the time, and I was teaching online. And so I had a little bit of equipment. I had a Zoom account and I had a microphone. That's basically for all you out there who want to start a podcast. That's kind of the starter pack. You just need a mic and some kind of way to record it. And all the negativity that was out there with Asian hate, especially here in America. We were kind of like, me, when I say we, I mean me and my thoughts. We were kind of thinking that we should throw out some positive ideas, some positive stories about Asians and just ways that Asian culture and Asian creators make the world better. And so I just wanted to talk about stuff that I like, and it's really random. Like our topics are super random. We could talk more about pros and cons of that later, but I just wanted to get stories out there and get faces out there and voices out there that just tell a diverse story, a interesting story about things that people are doing that maybe you realize or maybe you don't realize, but it's making our country and our world just better. And so just wanted to throw that out there, and it's been fun, and it's a lot of work, but
Yes.
I don't have a friend like Lingjie to do it for me, but yeah, it's definitely worth it, and I've been enjoying it since I've started.
Well, as you guys know, I don't have a job, so if either one of you want to hire out and spend some of your money so you can do less work, please reach out to me. You know my email address.
I'll send you an invoice for putting in your own ad here. Now, I mean, that's how the podcast started, right? But then I also want to get into the very initial creative process. Like, how did you really come together to create the first few episodes? Like, what was the thought process?
Thought process. Yeah, so the first couple episodes I just did with friends because I didn't want to talk by myself. And we just started talking about things that we were interested in. So first episode was K-dramas. You know, I had a couple friends that liked K-dramas, and everyone knows how popular those are. And then we did one on crying in H Mart, and then we did one on food. So it was just kind of like, I just wanted to talk about things that I like talking about, you know, with friends, and tried to kind of make it like a discussion like you would have over food, or, you know, when you see a friend. And then it kind of turned into interviews, and I've been doing a lot of interviews more lately, but I'm trying to circle back to the conversations and the chats about topics. But yeah, the thought process was just, let's talk about things that we like, and let's talk about why we like them and why they're great, and just bringing in different people of different backgrounds and ages to try to get their views on things. So that's kind of how it started. How about you, Lingjie?
As far as like where the direction of the podcast went, like I said before, we wanted to niche down. And I think at that time when we were in the initial phase of starting our podcast, I think Shang-Chi had just come out. So that was obviously a big deal in terms of representation for us on cinema, TV, movies. And we were still dealing with the whole bunch of Asian hate that was happening. So at the crossroads of those two big topics in the news, that's where we kind of like drove and steered our podcast towards. I would say, obviously, we're not a full-blown journalist like Isabel, and we're not having serious conversations like you, Curtis. Or we don't have the wisdom of age on our side to have these nice conversations. We try to take a more lighthearted approach to all of it. We do touch on serious subjects from time to time. We have guests on sporadically here and there as well, and we try to do it from like a everyday man's kind of spin, or as Ben and I often like to say, it's just those two drunk dudes at the back of the bar, but they're having a semi-interesting conversation, so you're just eavesdropping on them the whole time. Because I feel sometimes news is hard to digest when it's always in a very corporate format. So you can get your news, or at least your surface level news, just by hearing it from friends. And you know, like in real life, right? Sometimes we hear about news headlines, not through the news or TV or anything like that, but just through our friends at least. And then we'll dive into a little bit more of it ourselves if we are interested. So we have that same approach when it comes to our podcast.
And for you, Lingjie, the initial process, right? What was the hardest part? Was it to get Ben to realize how much work it takes to create the first few episodes?
I don't think Ben has realized how much work there is.
Still.
You know, actually, to his credit, he's constantly saying sorry. So I guess to some extent, he realizes that it does take a lot of work on my end. It's a lot of YouTubing. You know, as with anything in this world right now, when you want to learn how to do anything, you go on YouTube and you kind of, there's people out there that have asked that question that you're trying to ask right now, and there's answers to those questions. So it was a lot of YouTubing. My process is, I always find it interesting to start any kind of project, kind of figure out what it takes to turn nothing into something. So it was first figuring out the technical side of it, right? What is good audio equipment? How do you record? How do you do the actual technical stuff of it? So you have a foundation before we give our bad opinions on the internet. And then once we got past all the technical stuff, you know, once we had to stop worrying about how do you press record or what's the best mic, because we didn't want to really go through like 6 months of doing podcasts and be switching mics and stuff. The mic that we bought on day one is still the mic that we're using. And the equipment that we use is still the same exact stuff that we're using, because I spent the time just figuring out this is going to be it, and then I just don't want to think about it anymore. Let's just focus on the actual content of it. So it was just having a good technical foundation, and then the rest of it was just trying to figure out what we want to talk about and what the listeners want to actually listen to.
We should say too that we're throwing Ben under the bus a little bit, but
I love Ben.
no, yeah,
We all love him.
I love Ben.
yeah. So we've all interviewed him, and we know with Ben, it doesn't take much to get him going. Like you could throw a topic at him, literally that day, and he'll have a take.
He can talk for 5 hours
Talk
straight.
for 5 hours, and
Yes.
so the technical stuff and the planning is great, but when you hit go with Ben, it just goes, and you guys have that camaraderie and the history.
Yeah.
And you're a little bit of the straight man to his funny man, where it just kind of it works.
Like it's the odd couple for Curtis's age, or what's a more modern example for us? I'm trying to think.
I mean, like listening to you guys talk, it just gives off that feeling of like, oh wow, these two guys are the friendship that they have. It's the kind of friendship that maybe many people wish they had.
If you guys want to buy this friendship or buy that, I mean, take Ben off my hands, please. Clearance sale. Store closing.
No, he's like that friend. He's like the friend that you have that has ridiculous takes sometimes, but you just can't stop laughing. Like when I recorded with him, I had my old man wheezing, coughing laugh. I just couldn't control it because he's so funny and opinion on everything.
I know.
You could just throw out the color black, and he'll just have an opinion on everything about the color black for as long as you need him to go. He'll just go, and so yeah, you guys have something special, I think, between the two of you.
Also, a bit of background in terms of like how Proudly Asian started. I think I also told you guys like initially how I started the podcast was also, other than the whole mission that I wanted to do, was to really practice speaking in a more like casual way.
Yeah.
As opposed to back in the day on TV, it's all like very serious. I'm trying to like be able to speak more freely, flow casually in a sense. But I mean, I'm still practicing. But when I came across you guys' podcast, I was like, wow, how do these guys, they can just flow. Like, it's just so nicely done. That's how the podcast started. But I just want to know, like, how has it been so far? Like, are you at the point of thinking, oh, we're feeling a bit of success? Or, like, are you at the point of writer's block in podcast sense? Like, where are you at?
Well, we've taken turns going first. How about you, Isabel? Because this is just as much about you as it is about us. And I'm sure most of the people
52 weeks
listening right now would rather hear your story. How's it been for you so far?
I wasn't prepared for this.
Casual conversation, right? You said you want the casual conversation.
Oh my God. That's the true test.
Turnaround is fair play.
Yeah, I mean, right now, I do think the podcast is able to address some of the initial goals that I had. Because initially, when I started the podcast, I was just literally thinking, if I could stick to doing 5 episodes, that's a success already.
Oh, wow.
And now I have 52 episodes. I'm like, what the hell? Like, wow, that was not planned at all, first of all. Like, I thought doing 5 would be so hard. I mean, not saying it's easy, but I mean, this is where I'm at. And I mean, initially, I was also trying to widen that representation of guests in the sense of showing the world that Asians aren't just Asians who grew up in Asia, or like Asian Americans who have kind of like a more obvious representation in the Asian community around the world, right? But at the same time, I also want to find those Asians who aren't as represented. For example, like Asians who grew up in random places like Europe, Africa, and also even within the Asian community, maybe some of the cultures that aren't as well known, for example, like Burmese culture, there will be people who ask, where's Myanmar, right? So I want to find those people. And recently I've also been able to find Asian transgender guests, which they are very underrepresented and they have to stay hidden for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
And for me, it's also not easy to find them. But I want to carry on doing that, finding the guests who aren't always represented on media or who aren't always like headline friendly, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you're doing it more for yourself or for the people that listen to the podcast? If you had to pick, because the obvious answer is it's always somewhere in the middle. It's always a little bit of both sides. But if you had to really think,
it's a bit of both, and also perhaps for the guests as well, because for some of the guests, like I remember speaking to this Lao American chef, and then we put out a post that features the Laos national dish Laab, Laab. And then we got quite a lot of like messages from Lao people telling us that, oh wow, like thank you so much for like saying the record straight, that it's Laab, Laab, not Larb, which is the term that a lot of foreigners or like people who aren't from Laos would use. It's like small moments like that where they felt hopes in terms of like a foreigner or like someone who is not from their culture, who is able to advocate for their cultures. That's the kind of work that I want to do. So I think it's a bit of both for myself, for my listeners, and also for my guests. For myself, it's mostly education, like for me to learn more about like what other cultures are about too.
Back to your question, how do you guys measure success? Like, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, well, do you want to look at numbers often, or do you want to look at analytics, or is it just personal satisfaction?
We're going to be jumping around a little bit, but I would say if you're going to start a podcast, whether it's any like passion project for business, for something, you have to kind of realize that what you define as success in the beginning is going to change later on, right? So I'll be honest with you, in the beginning, we thought we could actually build something and then, you know, build something for the sake of having these metrics that other people would say is successful, download, listeners, followers, stuff like that. And along the way, we realized that none of that was as important as the people that we were meeting along the way, whether it be actual listeners, you guys, other fellow creatives, or just going out into the world and in real life getting a chance to meet other people. So the definition of success, like in our case, has changed, because I think we're at a point where we've gotten a chance to meet so many people, and that has been the best part of it all. And we feel successful to even get the chance to partner and to work and to even like interact, whether it be online or in real life with other people that, you know, we probably would have never gotten a chance to meet had we actually not done the podcast.
Yeah,
that's true.
Because it can be a little discouraging sometimes when you think you have a hit on your hands or a banger episode, and then you know the numbers aren't necessarily there to support it, but you feel great about it, you know, and you feel like, you know, I got to talk to this person, I got her story out there, I got his story out there, and you feel good about it. And, you know, sometimes that's what you need to keep going, because, you know, it's different than YouTube where you have the analytics every, you know, how many likes, how many subscribers, you know, it's different. People don't really swipe podcasts that often, you know, besides the three of us maybe, but most people don't usually swipe podcasts one after another. It's a relationship that takes a while to grow and build. And, you know, someone said that your biggest fan probably hasn't found you yet, you know, and so I've been kind of keeping that in mind and just making content that I think is good for me and for whoever's out there, and someone will find it, you know, hopefully. Yeah.
That's why it's important just to realize that the answer to the question I asked Isabel was, I think I'm doing it for myself, not in a really selfish way, but I kind of need that attitude so that I'm not affected by all the other parts of it. Because if I record something and I had a great time making that interview or making that chat with Ben, then it's fun on my end, and that's enough for me. And whatever metrics it does, if the episode does worse than the last one or better, or you know, blah blah blah, I'm not as affected by it that much because I'm really doing it in an unselfish way for myself, and everything else is just the cherry on top.
I gotta say, when you ask me like, oh, was I doing it for myself? I mean, I did not initially understand the question, but now that you put it that way, it's just like, right, because it also goes back to what maybe I initially wanted to do as well. It's like, because we probably all remember when, you know, conversations about being Asian were not cool. Back in the day when we were growing up, we even wanted to hide the fact that we were Asians. I'm not sure about you guys, but that definitely happened for me. Like just the usual things such as like we wanted to hide our lunch. People would tell us that our food was weird, and we would end up asking our families like, hey, can you like pack me something that's more normal, that looks more like my friends, like instead of Asian or Chinese. And then I still remember back in high school on a school bus, this guy, white British guy, my schoolmate, whispered down my ear saying like Chinese people are shit.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I was a teenager back then, and I was just so nervous, so scared. I was like, oh my god, shit, like what do I do? And it just didn't work well with my personality as well, because it's like I'm not someone who is okay with being able to just sit there silently and take in whatever was launched at me. But I was also very young. I had no idea what to do. And now this podcast is essentially a way for me to resolve that trauma.
Oh, that's true. It's kind of like prolonged therapy for you.
You call it that way. Therapy.
It is therapy, isn't it? I mean, it's nice to talk about things out loud.
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't realize that you have these thoughts in the back of your mind, but you never get a chance, or there's never a avenue for you to let them out. And like the podcast itself is a great place for the host or the producer just to talk about things that they want to talk about.
And it's also like to create that place for teenagers who come across similar situations like I did, right? I mean, back then I had nowhere to go, no one to talk to. But then through this podcast, I'm essentially creating this place or curating a library full of stories where, you know, like whenever teenagers or kids, they come across these situations where, for example, they aren't even sure about who they are or their identities, they can actually go to like scroll through our podcast catalog and find someone's story that they actually want to know about. Or like, let's say, for example, how Lingjie interprets being Chinese American, and also how Curtis sees it. There are so many ways to interpret it, and they could even find a version that really works for themselves.
No, you guys know I work with high schoolers, and so, you know, there's times when not every episode I do is going to appeal to a high schooler, but once in a while there's an artist or a musician or an actor who I might point a kid to and say, hey, you might want to listen to this episode because this person looks like you and is doing what you want to do, you know. And when I was growing up, I don't think, you know, back to the 80s, you know, there weren't a whole lot of people who look like me, you know, doing these jobs. And so I didn't even consider, you know, I was a theater major in college, but it was just so hard to imagine myself making a living doing that I didn't even pursue it beyond just school plays. But now, you know, when you see shows and films and dramas, but yeah, I mean, just if you can see it, you can be it, you know. I feel like part of our legacy might be just creating, like you said, an archive, a library for our sons and daughters and people that look like us that can see the future a little bit or see themselves in 10 years, 20 years, you know, what they might look like. So it's worth it, I think, definitely, to create this archive.
You ever thought about the fact that you're on the internet or you're putting yourself publicly, and eventually in the future, if you have kids or family, they will be able to find you on the internet either saying something really nice and profound or just screaming a horrible opinion that didn't really age too well?
Yeah, well, especially you guys dig into it, you know.
I've really thought about that because I have a 4-year-old son. And I'm like, at some point, he's going to get old enough when he can find my back catalog of crap about me screaming on the internet. At least with Curtis and his daughters, they can go back and, oh, my dad was very nice. He met these great people. He had these lovely conversations.
Your son's going to be like, oh.
I mean, it's just a quick question for you, right, Curtis? Because like you are the 5th generation of your family. So your family has been in San Francisco since 1850s.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
So I just want to know a little bit more about generations by generations and how you think, will your ancestors be proud of what you're doing right now? This is a really heavy question, but I just want to know.
Yeah, I don't know. I would hope so. I wonder what they would think, you know, especially the early ones. You know, if you ever watched the show Warrior, it takes place in San Francisco in the 1800s, and it makes me think about, you know, there's some background. My parents, my great-great-grandparents were not martial artists or anything. They weren't in a triad. But, yeah, you know, just making a living in a world that didn't really want them here, and, you know, just trying to survive for me and for my daughters, you know, trying to carve out a living. It humbles you, you know, it makes you think that you have some responsibility to do this. And I don't know, you know, I believe in spirits a little bit, and I believe in, you know, the greater universe. And so hopefully they're out there somewhere, you know, and they're able to see how far we've come, not me personally, but, you know, just how far their ancestors have come. And you know, we got work to do still. It's not perfect society by any means. It was funny. I interviewed some people that were first gen, and they were kind of like, wow, it's kind of like looking into the future when they look at fourth and fifth generation people. And at the same time, I don't know. I feel like I struggle with a lot of the same stuff still. You know, it hasn't completely flipped where it's all about equality and all about equity. And it hasn't totally flipped to be like, oh, we're a colorblind society or, you know, equal opportunity for everybody. It's not totally there yet. But I think we're getting there. I think we're starting to see more of it in the future. So hopefully the future looks good for people like my daughters and Lingjie's son.
Obviously, you're fifth generation, right? And when you talk to, let's say, like first or second generations, like, do you feel more jaded? Do they have more of like a fighter spirit, or
Yeah, I don't know. Well, in terms of academics, yeah, 100%. Like I remember there were kids at my high school who were first gen, and they were getting into these amazing schools, and I was just kind of sliding by, I was just kind of happy with B's, and they're just fighting. Yeah, so maybe a little bit, and I think it comes with generations, right? My parents were kind of like, yeah, do whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. Money is something to use, but not to dwell on. But then I think when your family maybe gave up everything to come here, sacrifice so much, that pressure to do well, the pressure to not make it in vain maybe is a little higher for newer immigrants. So maybe there's a little more fire in their belly than for a third or fourth generation person who's kind of like, I'll be fine.
Yeah, the fire is definitely there. I've said this a lot during my conversations with Ben, but just having parents on his side and my side who, and he said this, gave up their entire lives.
You're right.
Transplanted themselves to a place where they didn't speak the language, they couldn't find a job. They just had to just magically appear somewhere in the country and just say, hey, I'm going to make this work somehow.
Yeah.
Given that, and if you actually think about that, from time to time, it does kind of light a fire under your butt to just try a little bit harder than you maybe have wanted. Not to say that people like Curtis, who are generations removed from that process, are less fiery or less motivated, but it's just an extra level that a first or second generation person has.
I see.
Yeah, agreed.
But going back to doing podcasts, now I want to dive deeper into the goods and the bads of doing podcasts, right? Because you both have been doing podcasts for over a year. I just want to know, what do you enjoy the most about being a podcaster?
I've mentioned the people that we meet, and that's through all different places in real life. I've gotten the chance to go to a lot of different Asian themed events, whether it be screenings, charity work, stuff like that, just to be able to meet a lot of people from within our culture or within the branches of our culture, but just getting a chance to meet people like that and seeing how there's a lot of people doing work, whether or not you realize that they're doing it. Because like I said, if I had not done the podcast, these people would still be doing their work, but I would have no damn idea that they're doing something for us. So that's been the best part. Listeners, same thing, just more people again, that it's just been amazing to see that our content has resonated or connected with some people, that keeps people entertained, that if we miss a week, someone will actually text me to say, I hope everything's okay, which has happened. I was late for one day and had a couple listeners just text me, just making sure everything is okay, because I went on my drive this morning and you guys weren't there on a Thursday morning. So in some ways, knowing that someone cares, whether we're putting them to sleep, because I know some listeners listen to us when they go to bed, which is very odd, because the stuff that I listen to when I have insomnia is stuff that's mundane and boring, and that puts me to sleep. So whatever, but we're doing something for somebody. Mm-hmm. So the people is by far and away the best thing that we've gotten, and if we get more listeners, that just makes an already good thing even better.
100% agree. Yeah.
And I mean, someone listened to your podcast while giving birth as well, right?
Oh yes, we had someone listen to our podcast when she was, I don't think she was in the process at that moment of pushing, right? But she said she was in the waiting room. She was nervous. She was whatever. She was with her husband, and she put on the podcast just to kind of ease her mind. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. There you go. What about Curtis? What do you enjoy the most about podcasting?
Yeah, mostly the same, just meeting people that I would never have met otherwise, including you guys. But yeah, and then the listener feedback is always just super bonus. When you get someone to say, I didn't know this, or, I'm still a little bit of an educator, even on the podcast. I like to teach people things, and I like to learn myself. And so I've learned a lot. I've met some people. Hopefully people have gained something from it. And yeah, it helps you realize the world is small in a way, when you have a listener in the Netherlands or, somewhere around the world that you would never have met otherwise, but they drop you a quick little line and let you know that they like it or something. And yeah, so I think those by and far are the biggest advantage, and not the biggest advantage, but the biggest bonus of doing this. Yeah.
I remember listening to your collaboration with Teddy from a Briefcase podcast. You literally had that like biology teacher hat on, like on that episode, because you were like talking a bunch of words that I would never imagine like saying or putting together in one sentence. And I was like, oh, wow, that's a completely different side to Curtis. And it was so nice to see you talking about all the biology terms and the knowledge and commenting on how the murder would have happened or something like that.
I think we had a conversation on Instagram one time, Isabel, about, I think we were talking about why people get fat.
Oh yeah, like body image, and you were telling me about how I'll let you do the talking, actually.
Well, yeah, we were talking about it, and we were talking about how it's based on your ancestors, right? If your ancestors were from a land of plenty, they could eat calories and not be efficient with it. So they can eat a lot and not gain weight. But if you gain weight really easily, your ancestors were probably from an area where calories were at a premium, and so your body had to be able to process it really efficiently. So every calorie you eat becomes body mass, right? So we were talking about that at one time, something like that. But it's fun.
Yeah.
I like to do biology wherever I can.
Does that mean if you tend to be bigger, faster, or more easily, that your ancestors were
from
more likely in poverty?
Yeah, well, we're talking like 10,000 years ago, like cavemen days.
Okay.
So your ancestors, if you gain weight, let's say we all eat 1,500 calories, right? If you gain weight really easily from that, that means that your ancestors probably had to live off of like 3 seeds and some tree bark. So their metabolism is
They were vegans. They were...
Yeah, super ramped up. They never got sugar. They never got fat, right? But then so that's why if you go to McDonald's right now and you eat 2,000 calories, you'll gain weight because your body's so good at processing it.
Oh, God. How about you, Isabel?
How about me? Oh,
same question.
I was like,
your question to yourself.
I was thinking like, oh, you're asking me about like gaining weight.
No, I would not go there. I try to be a gentleman. Aside from we have like a little thing that we always jab at, or I should say I jab at US. I always try to find out how old Isabel is. And I know on the surface that sounds very rude to say to a very nice lady, but it's just a joke that we've had.
Yes.
So far, I can't find her birth date on the internet anywhere.
And now that you say this publicly, maybe like some sneaky people will actually
please,
reach out to you.
If you know Isabel and you want to just quietly tell me her age, you can make a fake account on Instagram, send me a message, scan or take a picture of her birth certificate, and then just get rid of the account. I won't mind. Find me on Instagram at Worst Asian Pod, please. Thank you.
Whatever you get, I'll just tell you it's fake news. But anything that I enjoy the most about doing the podcast, I mean, it's kind of cliche, but obviously, like you guys mentioned, the people. One of the reasons why I started working as a journalist was also for myself to be able to like meet more people and get to know their whys and why they are like this, why they think a certain way. So through this podcast, I'm able to meet a lot of interesting people. And like I mentioned, a lot of people that don't get features by the media a lot. So there would be no way for me to really learn about them unless I really like meet them and talk to them. And I would have never imagined being able to meet a Chinese American guy in San Francisco who is 5th generation. Like his family was in San Francisco since 1850s. Like if not for the podcast, I would have never met you guys. So that's the people part. The other part would be a little bit for myself in the sense of having done journalism for a while, having done like digital content for a while. This Proudly Asian, everything that's happening is really a test for me to flex that creative muscle, how far I could go. And it feels like a playground for myself because I don't need to get like my editor's approval. I don't need to get someone to approve the graphics that I make. So I'm able to like test out a lot of things. So in a way, it feels like a break for me.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. I think we can all say that's true, but it's somehow it's the kind of work where you don't mind doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Unless you guys do mind doing it. I don't know.
I mean, this is the part that I'm getting into. Like, I mean, with the good, there will be bad, right? Let's be honest.
Great segue. Great segue.
So what are the low lights? What are the parts that you don't really enjoy about podcasting?
It is probably if you had to do intentional marketing, that is probably the toughest part. Because as much as we like to do it for ourselves, at the end of the day, it would be nice if you can spread it out to more people. And that's just about having reach and marketing and getting your face out there. So that's maybe the corporate side of doing an independent podcast that feels a bit stale. For myself, I always joke about this. I was never on the internet prior to having a podcast. I had the Instagram, I had the Facebook and everything, but that was just a placeholder just to take my name. Like I didn't do anything with it. I didn't log in for 2 years. And then now having to learn that, social media itself, for instance, is a pivotal part of doing the podcast, whether or not you like it. And Isabel has her phone out. Is she trying to search my own personal?
Right now.
She's searching my socials right now. No, it's true though. It's tough because as much as we can hate social media, it is an integral part if you are looking to expand your podcast and hopefully reach more people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you want people to listen to your stuff, especially if you think it's good or if it could be beneficial, like the more people that you can touch, the better, right?
Right.
And social media, unfortunately, now is the only means by which a regular human being like you and I, without a full marketing team or budget, can actually do so relatively cheaply. And that's not to say that every social media follower is going to convert 1-for-1 to a podcast listener. It's probably a tiny percentage, right? It's a tiny percentage. I would say most of my social media following for the podcast does not even listen to the actual podcast. And I would also say that most of the podcast listeners don't probably follow us on social media. Like the numbers just pan out that way. But social media has been both a horrible thing and both a nice thing because it has allowed me to flex my social media marketing editing skills or do a lot of YouTube down that well. But it is tough if you do what I'm trying to do and use social media just as a marketing branch of it.
Could you do what you're doing if you had a full-time job?
There is no, I don't want to curse, but there's no fucking way that I could do any of this shit to the extent that I do it right now.
Yeah.
If I was what's it called when you have a job? Employed. If I was employed, I was struggling to find the words.
It's been too long.
It's not in his dictionary.
Yeah.
It's not
Being
in my
employed.
lexicon anymore, being employed. But there is no way. There is no way that I would be able to.
You're posting, what, 3-4 times a week now?
I'm trying to post 4 or 5 times a week across every goddamn social media platform, which is Instagram, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Facebook Reels.
Yeah.
What else is there? I don't know. Mastodon, are you guys on that now? Because
Not even.
dead. I don't know.
What's that?
People that are transitioning from Twitter are going to something called Mastodon, and I have tried to look into it. It's like a Twitter thing, but it's like Twitter meets Slack because there's sub channels. I can't even figure out how to set the thing up. Mastodon. Anyways, to Curse's question, there's no way.
Yeah.
And I would say most people that do a podcast are not in my situation. They don't have the time that I do. They don't have the OCD that I do. So there's no way they could do. Not that I'm more competent than someone else, because I'm not. But I just have the luxury of free time.
Yeah.
Well, secretly you think you're more competent. Knowing
right.
you.
Yeah, your quality is
said
good.
it. I did
Your
it.
quality is good. Yeah, no, you put good stuff out there, but yeah, sometimes I'm like,
Yeah.
dang, Lingjie, it's the 5th post this day. I see
No,
you all over. I can't like them all.
I know.
You have to throw enough shit at the wall so that hopefully something sticks. Every once in a while, something will stick to the wall, and you don't know why.
Yeah,
And it's not even the ones that you thought would stick most of the
Yeah,
time.
it doesn't. And it could stick on one platform and just bomb on something else. But I try not to take it to heart as well.
yeah.
But Curtis, what about you? Like, what do you not enjoy the most?
Well, we've talked about it before as the technical stuff, the flubs. I've forgot to hit record a couple times. I was late to my own podcast, trying to do time zones. I flubbed on the time zone conversion in my head, and I just showed up an hour late. My guest had been texting me like, "Where are you? I'm sitting here. Is there a technical issue?" And it's so embarrassing. But Yeah, like Lingjie said, I don't mind the time. The time is okay. It takes hours, to be honest. But I don't mind doing it, and I'm at the point in my life where I don't really leave the house all that often. So I have the time to do it, but...
Is that due to your bad knees?
No, it's just my antisocial tendencies, I guess. But yeah, so I don't know. I don't mind the time putting into it, but when I make a mistake and it just doesn't sound good, or if I make a guest record something more than once, it's kind of it's so annoying. I'm so happy that my guests are nice, because they've all been gracious about it. But yeah, there's been a couple flubs on my part, which are just really embarrassing and not fun at all.
Have you learned from your mistakes, Curtis?
I'm trying.
Have you?
I thought I did. Every time I do it and I think I learn from it, and then I do it again, I'm like, oh no. So maybe is the answer. We'll see. Future will tell.
How about you, Isabel?
I agree with Curtis because the way that we run the podcast, mine is a little bit more similar to Curtis, right? It's kind of like one-man band, and we...
Whoa. I'm also a one-man band, okay?
Okay, yeah.
One turns at work.
Do you know those sharks that swim and they have like the smaller sharks that just latch onto their body and they're eating the parasites off the larger fish? I am that larger fish, and Ben is a fattened version of the fish that's latched onto me.
The remore eel.
I'll make sure this part goes to one of the reels, so like
Please,
everyone knows that Worst Asian Podcast is a one-man band also, despite there are two men appearing. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like I always have to do like guest booking, right? Because for most of the episodes, we do have a guest at the very least. I mean, I've been doing some solo episodes because some of these episode ideas maybe just work better if it's solo, or like maybe there could be like times that I just got a bit tired of coordinating guest bookings and I just decided to give myself a break and go for a solo episode to sort of, catch a break, right? So I do think while it's been really, really nice to be able to meet a lot of guests that I would never have met otherwise, kind of like coordinating that logistics, working through time zones and making sure that everyone understands how to do the recording, because sometimes we do virtual recording, right? So like we want to make sure that they are sitting in a quiet room, they have the proper Wi-Fi and internet to connect on Zoom virtually. There could be some tiny moments where like they just wouldn't understand why strong internet was so important. Or some of the minor things that could potentially make someone who comes from production background stress out so much.
Yeah.
Like there could be guests who might not necessarily understand the importance, which is not their fault because that's not something that they're used to, right? But then we do this every day, so it's more obvious to us. Yeah.
Have you had one person or one guest, and you don't have to name names, where they did something that kind of really threw you off?
I mean, most of the time it's really like the technical challenge, or like some of them maybe aren't as tech savvy. So when there's a technical challenge, they are also not sure how to address that. But really like the only way to address that is if I was physically there.
Yeah.
So you're always just kind of like sitting on the other side of the call and be like, I don't know
Click
how to
this,
help you.
do this, yeah.
I don't want to jinx it, but now that I mentioned, I mean, I hope like future guests don't do that. Is during my journalism.
Someone's going to do that right now.
During my journalism days, there could be guests who would stand you up 5 to 10 minutes before the camera started rolling, right? So,
Oh, wow.
yeah. So, I mean, that wasn't a great moment. I think that happened to me maybe a couple of times. Really wasn't great. And I used to have nightmare about that kind of situation as well. But yeah, I guess maybe the most challenging part for doing podcasting would be kind of like that tiny stressful moments before the guest actually shows up, you thinking that is he or she going to show up.
That is insane. I mean, you two do predominantly guests, and I used to do more of a 50-50 split. Now it's like more a 25% split with the guests and everything. But even for me, with the few guests that I try to book every once in a while, it does get stressful.
Yeah.
Do you guys think it's worth it having celebrity or like big guests, but having that stressful back and forth of like not sure if they will actually do what you want them to do? Or do you prefer actually working with guests who might come from kind of like a modest following? Is it worth having like celebrity guests?
Yes and no. Like I think
No one dares to answer that question.
You can go for it, Curtis.
Yeah, no, I think it is. I mean, it's really fun. I enjoy it, But yeah, there's always hurdles to getting them on. But the actual listeners, in my case, tend to not be super impressed. If I get someone who might be a little bit more well known, I feel like the listeners click on things that interest them, and sometimes if you get someone that other people know or a story that they've heard before, they may not be as interested. So the numbers don't wildly fluctuate based on the guest. It's more the topic.
True.
So yeah, so I don't know. Yeah, I like it. But I don't think the listeners are necessarily that impressed because they might have heard 5 other podcasts with this person.
Yeah, that does kind of make sense. And I don't mind if you keep this in but I think it's all, if you want to look at it from a business perspective, it does make sense because getting high profile guests, you can then subsequently leverage that into getting other guests because you have an already built portfolio of guests that you can now approach someone else with and say, I would like you to come on. Past guests of the podcast have been X, Y, and Z. And if it's a name that they may know or their agent or their rep may know, immediately before they do some research, you at least get your foot in the door and they think, oh, this person has a podcast that's semi-well established based on his past guests.
No, 100%. Yeah, because there's times when I'll have to reference who I've interviewed, and I think it makes a difference.
I do echo what Curtis said as well. Like in terms of listeners' interest level, from the numbers, I do see most of the time it's not really like episodes with the most famous guests that would perform the best. It's normally like guests with really relatable or interesting topics that perform the best. I mean, there could be times where I look at the numbers and I was like, oh, wow, actually, like of all the episodes, that one was so far the best performing episode. So yeah, I think I have something similar to what you just said, Curtis.
Yeah.
Do you guys find yourself, I guess, tailoring your stuff towards your listeners more so now that you've been doing it for a little bit of time, as opposed to trying to guess what they want?
It's a bit of both. I think most of it's still sort of like my curation, sort of like my editorial judgment. But of course, the curation and the editorial judgment could be influenced by the kind of feedback that I received from my listeners as well.
Yeah, a little bit. Just based on some numbers, I notice my audience tends to be female, between like 28 and 40. That's kind of like where I get more listeners. So I think about that a little bit. So I'll do a little less fishing episodes, I think, in the future.
Curtis himself loves fishing, by the way.
I love it, but not a lot of other people do. Well, it's very niche.
He has an aquarium in the background.
He does.
I do.
Is the lid to that tank fully open or is it like partially open? I'm trying to see.
Does that bother you if it is open? But you know what actually makes the biggest difference in my mind, that I've seen, is if the person is on board with your mission and they share on their socials more than, like if you have, let's say, so-and-so person that people might recognize, if they don't share it, who's going to find it, right? It's just still going to be your listeners.
That's true.
But, if I do a collaboration with someone and they're on board and they're like, hey, I'm going to put this I'm going to collaborate on Instagram with you, or I'm going to share it in my story, it makes a big difference because then their fans or their followers can find them,
Building on that like collaborative mindset, right? I love it when the guests, when they show up for the recording, they would not just be like, oh, I'll follow what you say, I'll follow the agenda, but then they would kind of have that like mini discussion with you. It's like, oh, hey, like how do you want to position this episode? Like what's the outcome that you want? But normally I'll be like, hey, I mean, I don't really have a set outcome that I want out of this episode. Like a lot of it, I want it to sort of be free flow and driven by the guest as well. They don't need to have that pressure of wanting to say something that I want to hear or my listeners want to hear. Like most of the time, I just really want to know what they have to say authentically.
Yeah.
But I mean, moving on, what are some of the craziest moments since you became a podcaster? Like it could be both good or bad, just crazy.
I'm trying to think of bad first because that always stands out in your mind
Does it
little
involve
bit better.
Ben?
I always crap on my co-host Ben a lot, but to be honest with you, I have a lot of tolerance for him because I've known him for 30 plus years. And at the same time, I do know that he, in some ways, is trying his best. Yeah. His best is just not up to my standards at all. But that's I try to pin that on me, right? Because I can't change someone else for who they are. I just try to work around with what I have. And I've made this comparison, I think maybe live on the air. If you think of a podcast, my podcast, as let's say a car, maybe even a luxury car, even a luxury car can't get from point A to point B without a singular tire. And even that singular tire does not work if that tire has no air. So if the podcast is a tire, if the podcast is a car, then Ben is the air in the tire. So every role is very pivotal.
Yeah.
And as difficult as it is, as proficient as I can get on doing marketing or the technical side of it, if I did not have Ben to have a fun conversation with, none of it is possible. Because I genuinely don't think people would like to hear just me, Lingjie, interview a person that I know for like a couple weeks, right? They want to hear me and Ben, two friends, interact. And I think that's where the secret sauce is. So as much as he doesn't do a lot of technical work for the podcast, it's not possible if I didn't have Ben.
There would be no. You know, I have a theory too about Ben. You know, we've all recorded with him, and I think the theory is that kind of if he trusts you and he likes you, he is more comfortable at, let's say, being late or, you know, letting you down a little bit. So I think he loves you a lot, Lingjie, because he trusts you and he knows that he can get away with it. And so I took it as a badge of honor. He was a little late to my recording, but we made it work. But
dude, you say a little late. How many hours late was Ben?
He was about 4 hours late. But I took it as a sign of respect, you know, that he trusts me, that he knows that I would not, you know, be mad at him and that we'd still be friends because, you know, he only would do that to a friend, I thought. So that's my theory.
He likes you more then because he was late for 4 hours, but he was late for like maybe half an hour for my recording.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Isabel, he was only late half an hour because I was on his ass the whole morning. I was like, I somehow volunteered to be his agent or his PR rep and get him on the podcast with you, Isabel. And because I already started, I was committed to it. If you had to deal with him, I'm sure he would have been just as late.
Yeah, because he loves you too, Isabel.
Thank you so much. I know for making that happen. I know like how much you've been like pressuring him. I did mention that during my episode with Ben as well. But then it's like literally during the email communication, you were the one who kept on like pushing him to reply and all that. So I know how hard you worked to get him on.
Ben is like a rock star back in the 80s and 70s where he's a great, talented person. But whenever we do concerts, he just has to be off drugs for like 3 hours. And then afterwards, he can just disappear and right until the next concert. And I have to just do everything. I have to get him onto the bus, make sure he's hydrated before he performs. And then he can just disappear into the void.
Tough job. We did talk a lot about what could potentially stress us out, and we also talked about how far we have progressed. But here's the question, like, I feel like probably every podcaster would have pondered about this question, but have you guys ever felt like quitting?
Yes.
Really?
It's a quick yes. Not for you two?
I haven't gotten there yet.
That's good.
Yeah.
I was never at the stage of like, oh, I'm going to cancel it. It's not worth it. But then I have had questions of like, okay, I mean, I'm employed, so I have to do a day job. The day job could get quite stressful. And the time that I spend on working on this podcast would be like right after I get off work every day. So I would sometimes work until like 1 a.m., 3 a.m. And there were times when I was literally editing the podcast or editing the videos. I was dozing off while still trying to like get the video edited. And then I would think like,
why am I
like,
doing
you know
this?
What? Why am I doing this? Like, this is so unhealthy. But at the same time, this is where my passion lies. This is something that really means a lot to me. So I just feel like I need to keep fighting for this to happen. So yes, there were times where like I'm so exhausted. Like maybe I shouldn't do this. Maybe it's not really going to go anywhere. I've thought about that.
Yeah. I go through those times sometimes because I try to do a lot in terms of the actual podcast itself. I release weekly. I don't think I've missed a week since I've started like a year and a half ago because I'm committed to it. You know, for technical reasons, I think I've told you guys on the side, missing a week sometimes is not good for the longevity of a podcast. And I kind of take that a little bit too seriously. So it does kind of stress me out at times when I know I have to pump something out. I love the actual recordings, the interviews, the actual chats themselves are super easy. It's just everything else that's involved with, cooking up a podcast and making it presentable and having it be ready every single Thursday for me. During those times, and if I have any listeners that are from my podcast or just listening to this, I do this primarily through those tough periods because I know there are people that that enjoy having us on their phone or their car or their earbuds or something during their commute, and I'm during those tough times I mainly think about them. So I push through with just putting it out, because not that I'm by contract I have to have a thing every single week, but I feel like I'm taking something away from someone else that they expect, and I would feel bad about it.
I think for me, I work with teenagers, so having adult conversations is so fun for me, so I enjoy it. I don't know, I haven't gotten to that point yet, but if it's not fun, I'm not going to force myself to do it, because we're not really gaining anything monetarily or a whole lot out of this other than what we talked about already. But just having those conversations and putting it out into the universe has been satisfying. So I haven't gotten there yet, but at the same time, I don't stress about missing a week or two. But I try to do every week. But like you said, Isabel, if you're really tired and falling asleep, I'm not gonna force myself to crank an episode out just because I want to get one out. I think the audience would be pretty forgiving.
I mean, sometimes I do think about, if one of you guys one day tell me that you decide to cancel your show, I'll definitely feel quite sad. So please continue doing what you do.
On the flip side, I am trying to look for employment now. That is not a joke, because listeners to my podcast will know my story. I stopped working full time when we had our first and only son, when we had our son, and I decided to be a full-time stay-at-home father. So that has taken up the majority of my time over the past couple of years. But now that he's in school and he's starting kindergarten this upcoming fall, there's really no need for me to actually be at home talking with you guys during the weekday while he's at school. That's not a jab at you guys. That's just a jab at the fact that I have too much free time sometimes. So I am going to be transitioning into the workforce at some point. The amazing thing, and I'm not sure if I said this to you guys, but I'm actually going to look to do something completely different than what I did before. So I was in real estate property management, very corporate, very boring, and very yada yada. And I'm going to try to do something more creative. And it's going to definitely be an offshoot of what I've learned through this whole podcast, whether it be as an actual podcast producer or something in social media, something in PR marketing. I am looking at those avenues. And that's maybe the one cherry on top for all this, that I've been able to flex that creative side of my brain that I didn't even know was there. So to tie this back into the question, maybe when I have a full-time job, I'm going to, not cancel the podcast, obviously, because I don't want to just throw away something that I've built, but I might take it a little bit more easy and not so stressful on myself. I might miss a week here and there if it does happen. I mean,
have you guys ever thought of getting some help? Either from, let's say, hiring an intern.
Money. We ain't got that money.
I wish I was in the position to find some help. And during times where I was just absolutely knackered from doing my day job, I would be like, maybe I should just skip lunch and find some help,
Yeah.
But money.
Yeah.
What was that word that you just used, Isabel?
Knackered.
Knickers? What did you say?
Yo, come on. You never heard of knackers?
Knackers? Please spell that for me.
Why? Are you serious?
I'm being serious.
Knackered.
It's like knickers, but knackers. Is that a verb or a noun?
The state of being adjective.
It's an adjective. It's it means I'm tired. It's more than tired. Slammed.
Huh. Okay.
And here's your English lesson for the day.
Oh, God. I mean, dude, it would be so nice to offshoot some of this to somebody else, but I'm sure you guys know this. We have OCD in terms of creative control. I would hate to have it be sent to someone else, and then because my standards or just my preferences are different than someone else's.
Do it again.
Yeah, it's either you do it again or I have to then just redo it anyways, right?
Right.
You guys kind of, feel that, because my episodes, I'll record for an hour and a half maybe. but it'll be cut down minus 15, 20 minutes because there are maybe segments or things that just didn't flow well, and I'll cut it with it. Like, I'm trying to curate the episode so that it flows well, and I don't think I can trust, I mean, this is all my own fault, but I don't think I could trust that to someone else, even if I had the money for it.
Yeah, but Ray just found that AI program from Adobe. So maybe someday we'll have an AI editor, and the robot will learn your preferences and start editing the way you do.
That's
Someday.
true.
Maybe.
I mean, I completely agree with like Lingjie. Like for myself, I mean, of course, I always think about getting help every day, but then sometimes I also think about like, oh, if I have to go through the trouble of briefing the person and getting him or her to produce the work to the level that I think would be good enough, it's going to take forever, and it's probably going to be faster if I just do it by myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. I don't even know how much it would cost to actually hire someone to do a singular episode.
Where I need help is like graphic, because I'm definitely not from any sort of like design background, and I find producing graphics the most stressful part of doing this podcast. I mean, I could be someone, because I worked with visuals a lot in TV news, so I might have a good eye as a non-designer, but I still think I'm very incompetent in the sense of design. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah.
Are you talking about in terms of like the episode artwork or the social media stuff?
Social media,
Yeah.
yeah,
The videos.
everything visual.
Oh yeah, that's tough. I mean, you have to try to prioritize what you can do best, right? So number one, best audible episode in terms of listening quality. That's like, you guys would say that's like the first thing, right? Make sure that the actual thing itself is good to listen to, and then like everything else is just a matter of time. How much time do you have to deal with everything else, and just prioritizing and just going down the list? So like if I make like a real clip for social media and it's not perfect, I'm not going to go back in and spend like another 15, 20 minutes like chopping off 2 seconds here and there, or like zooming in here, because I know that going down the list, I only have a certain amount of time, which is always tough for an independent podcast.
I mean, before we move on to the next segment, I just have one more question, right? I wouldn't say we're veteran, but we are some sort of like experienced podcaster. I mean, we could say that about ourselves.
Sure. Yeah.
So what advice would you have for those who are thinking about having a podcast? Or I don't know if people are actually thinking about having a podcast. Maybe this is like outdated. This belongs in the pandemic era.
Yeah.
I don't know. But any advice you guys have?
Yeah, I think go in knowing how much time it's going to take, and are you willing to put in that time? You know, it's hours. It's a couple hours for each episode, recording, editing, and promoting. And then I think the one advice I got from somewhere online was to figure out, you know, are you going to answer a question? Are you going to educate? Are you going to entertain? You know, figure out kind of what your mission is, or a little bit of both. You know, like Lingjie does a little bit of entertaining with some education, I guess. A little.
Quotes in quotation marks, large ass quotation marks.
But yeah, figure out
Whatever education means.
Yeah, I mean, just figure out where does your podcast fit into the Ethernet, you know, the ethos. Like, figure out where your podcast fits into the world, and would people be interested in that, you know, or is it just you talking, or is it just, you know, for yourself? But is it gonna answer someone's question or fit a need before you get started? Because, you know, it is a lot of work if you're not gonna have listeners. So you gotta try to find some listeners somewhere out there.
Yeah, you have to really do it for yourself. We talked about this before, unless Isabel cuts that part out, but you really have to do it for yourself first and foremost. And that is not to say that you need to be selfish about it, but you have to either enjoy the process or you have to enjoy the conversations that you're recording, even if you're listening, even if there's 2 people that's listening to the episode. Because worst case scenario, if that does happen, can you picture yourself continuing to do it? And if you don't think that you can, then maybe you shouldn't start a podcast. Because unfortunately, it's like with most restaurants or small businesses, a large percentage of them are not going to succeed. And can you picture yourself not succeeding by those metrics and still wanting to do it? So if you think you're going to be comfortable with that, then you should definitely give it a shot. And the other thing I would say is just to have thick skin, because remember, you're putting yourself out into the world, whether it's for your opinions that may be good or bad. No matter what you say, someone's going to say you're wrong. Someone's going to scream on the internet that you're wrong. So having thick skin, even if you're not on social media, just putting your opinions out there is something that you need to really hone in, because everything you say on the internet, there's going to be someone there that's going to scream the opposite at you.
If anyone's interested in any advice I have, I think number one is not to focus too much on numbers, especially when you are starting out. Please just don't go around and look at, some celebrities' podcast and question why you don't have their kinds of numbers, because they are celebrities, and a lot of celebrities are actually getting into the podcasting space currently. So don't compare yourself to them. And there could also be like some other indie podcasters who have been running their podcast for a number of years, and they have accumulated a certain following as well. So, I mean, don't ask yourself the question of like, oh, you're just starting out, like, why aren't you there yet? Because it does take a bit of time to curate that following, build that relationship with your listeners, but instead spend the time to focus on like really building that relationship, connecting with your listeners, even if it means there are only like 10 of them. But that will definitely the part that's the most valuable, that you probably will enjoy the most, which is trying to get to know your listeners and how you can help them.
Do you guys think you have to be either an introvert or extrovert or good at public speaking to do a podcast? Because you're literally publicly speaking on the internet. Do you guys find yourself an introvert or an extrovert in real life?
I'm definitely an introvert.
Yeah.
Or despite my MBTI says otherwise, that I'm an ENTJ, it says I'm extroverted, but my read on that was like, I am extroverted in the sense of I get energy from hearing people's stories when those stories are good.
Yeah. I don't think it matters if you're introvert or extrovert per se, but I don't know. I think I
Public speaking? Any practice in public speaking? Because for the most part, Isabel has a history in being on TV in front of a camera and talking. You, Curtis, you talk to a bunch of people, 20, 30 kids that don't pay attention to you on a daily basis. So you're comfortable with like speaking in front of people.
with no one listening.
Well, yeah.
Well, and that means you don't care if people are listening and you still do your thing.
Great time. But like, do people need to have some kind of practice?
Probably, yeah.
I don't know.
Like I would say, like for advice wise, I would say, record at least 3 episodes before you launch. Get a little rhythm into it. Figure out how many hours it's going to take you per episode before. If you're going to try to, and I think Lingjie's right, you should try to do weekly if you can. And when I started, I just recorded like maybe 90-minute conversations, and then I split it into 2. So I was only recording twice a month just because I wasn't sure how much time I had. So, get a couple episodes, like they say, in the can, and then edit them up, figure out how long it's going to take you, and then realize, okay, I can do 2 a month. I can do 2 a month and split it into 4, or, figure out what you're going to do before you really get in the weeds where it's like, okay, life is happening and, all this other stuff is going on. Can I realistically do this or not? Like, give it a test run first.
I mean, I would say, do you need to be good at public speaking? I don't actually consider myself being good at public speaking, because who will actually say that, right? But I think
I think you're pretty good.
Oh, thank you so much. I really don't feel that way, honestly. And but I think it's okay if you're just starting out and you're not great at ad-libbing or speaking on the fly, because there's always post-production. So just make sure you edit out those dead airs.
Podcasting and stuff. Do it for yourself. Have fun with it, because the most likely outcome, and I'm not trying to be pessimistic, is you won't see the success on the scale of the people that you listen to.
It takes time.
Yeah.
But now it's time for us to move on to the next segment, which is called Rapid Bias. And in this segment, I'll be asking my guests biased questions that they've got asked at some point in life. And for this specific segment, we have both Curtis and Lingjie participating. They will take turns. So, Curtis and Lingjie, are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Let's do it.
All right, let's go. The first one is for Lingjie. Lingjie, does it have a special meaning?
Oh, yes, for sure. It means cosmic space dragon flying through the moon every evening.
In your own dialect.
No, dude, it has no goddamn meaning. And if it does, I unfortunately don't know it. What the hell does Michael mean? What does Philip mean? You tell me.
That's a good one. And the next one is for Curtis. Why is your Chinese so bad? Or just speak English.
I wish I could speak Chinese, but I came from the era where it was assimilation only. So we prided ourselves in not having a Chinese accent. So unfortunately, never really learned.
And Lingjie, back to you. Wow, I'm amazed. Your English is that good.
Wow, I'm amazed your English is that good too. Sorry, I actually don't speak that much English. Let me just get out of this conversation. I'm always amazed people have the balls to ask something like that. And I know they think it's a compliment. Most of the time, it's coming from somewhere sincere. But even me, a person with thick skin that generally does not get bothered by all these comments, that one kind of does hit close to home because what else do you expect?
Or like, this might apply to more like Cantonese speakers, but then it's like whenever, oh, you're Chinese, ni hao.
Right.
And then Cantonese speakers will be like, we don't say ni hao. Okay, back to you, Curtis. Your family has been here for so many generations. Why don't you have 10 houses already?
Because the Chin family was not good at managing money, I guess. Only have the one.
How dare you? And back to Lingjie, it's about your name again. Do you have an easy Americanized name?
No, this is actually a serious answer. I do not, and I would prefer not. Now, young Lingjie at the time, I don't know why he did not choose to pick a random American name like John or whatever, but thank God for him, because current present Lingjie is actually glad that I have my unique name, even though I have to go through the hassle of telling people exactly how to pronounce it. But I will say I do have a Starbucks name whenever I go to Starbucks because I'm not going to see the person there for more than 30-40 seconds. I just tell them it's Robert, whatever. So I am Robert at Starbucks.
Yeah, I know someone whose Starbucks name is just James because it's easy.
Yes. It makes it so much easier. I'm never going to see this person again.
Yeah.
My name is Robert. You're not going to ask me how to spell Robert. The person that's handing me the drink later is not going to mispronounce Robert.
true.
It just makes my life so much easier.
Yeah, it saves you the pain of hearing people even trying or like butchering your name.
Lingjie, is it actually pronounced Lingjie or is it more like Lingjie or?
Lingjie. But
Lingjie.
but I say it Lingjie because throughout my entire life it's been like that since I was young. So I've taken on that name. The only person that say it properly are my parents.
Right.
Obviously.
Finally, Curtis, would you like a fork?
Oh man, that's the worst. It's embarrassing when they.
That is a real insult when they take away your chopsticks and they just give you a fork instead.
They don't even take it away. They didn't start. They weren't even there in the first place. Though honestly, if I have a plate, I would rather have a fork, and I'm not offended. But if I have a bowl, a fork in a bowl doesn't work at all. So I'm gonna go. I'm not really offended, but it's just embarrassing.
Yeah. I mean, this is unpopular opinion on an Asian podcast, but I do prefer having a fork because I don't have the best
dexterity.
My chopstick skills aren't great. And then, I don't know, whenever I use chopsticks, my hand just gets really sore within the first 5 minutes. And then I just prefer using fork because it's so much easier to pick up stuff. I'm gonna get cancelled by saying this, but it's my life. that's my preference.
It's so funny. We just did an episode the other day in which we talked about that briefly, and I was gonna actually cut that into a clip about how I think personally a chopstick is the best tool among everything else. Because if you were stuck somewhere or you had to only choose one utensil for the rest of your life, I would personally take chopsticks because it's basically an extension of your fingers, and as long as you have the hand muscle to do it, I think it's the best. If you get old, then maybe...
Well, and the cook has to cut it into small pieces, too, so... For some Western, like a pork chop is not the best, but, if they eat Chinese food and they cut it right, to bite-sized pieces, then it's perfect.
Although you could just pick up the whole chopstick and just take bites out of it. That's what I do.
Yeah, I guess.
Chopstick is still like 2 pieces. A fork is 1 piece. This is gonna turn into a debate.
What is the point of that? If it's 2 or 1 pieces, I don't see what that adds.
It's 2 and 1. What if you lose one of the chopsticks? Then you're gonna be so stressed out.
Nothing sadder than one chopstick.
But the great thing about chopsticks is if you're stuck somewhere, just go grab a twig. It's basically the other half of your chopstick. You can't just grab something from nature that looks like a fork or looks like a spoon. I'm looking at a tree outside my window right now. I see a whole bunch of chopsticks just sticking up from the branches. It's all the same shit.
Please take a photo for us. But yeah, thank you for playing this round of rapid fires. Now, to wrap up the episode, I just want to know, do you have any grand plans for your podcast? What's next for your podcast?
Grand plans, no. Ideally, we would like it to be self-sustaining in terms of like the actual cost of it. I'm not sure if you guys have done the actual math, but I looked at, I took in my Excel sheet because I plotted where I spent every single cent, but we looked at it and our first goal is to just pay ourselves back for everything that we bought and just break even. And then from there, if we can just have it be self-sustaining in terms of the monthly cost of hosting a podcast with the services that we pay for, if it can just be net zero, I'll take that as a victory.
It's a win.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a win.
Curtis?
Yeah, well, let's see. I've got some big interviews coming up. I got Michelle Yeoh, Simu Liu, Aquafina, Henry Golding. You might have heard of them. They're coming on, so everybody tune in. InfatuAsian Podcast. Oh, yeah, and Gemma Chan's going to be my co-host.
Oh, yeah. It brings me to ask, do you guys have any, wish list in terms of guests?
George Takei is someone that I've wanted to always talk to.
Yeah.
Because he's been around so long and he's gone through so much, and his interest, his story, you can make like 5 podcasts from different parts of his career and his life to talk about.
Yeah, no, he'd be a good one. Yeah, I don't know. There's celebrities are fine, but their stories are out there. Like, who hasn't heard Simu Liu in an interview, right? So I don't know how groundbreaking that would be. It'd be good for me. I would enjoy it. But I don't think it's necessarily going to change the world for one more Simu Liu interview. So I'm fine with interviewing people that are on their way up, or maybe people that I find interesting that maybe people haven't heard of and get their story out there. So I would like to do some more about my family history. I don't know it all, all this stuff. And so just do a little more digging, talking, I have less and less of this, that my grandmother's generation, there's not a whole lot of people left that know the story. So I got to try to get some of those. And like you said, to archive it would be kind of cool, to get, even if not that many people care or listen to it, at least my family would have it, somewhere.
I would be interested.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. All right, I'll do it.
Isabel?
For myself, I always joke about wanting to have Henry Golding, but
Always.
I agree with Curtis. It would be nice to speak to Henry and ask him, all the questions about why is he so insanely attractive and all that, right? But yeah, I guess there aren't any names in the sense of being on my wish list right now, but I just want to be able to find stories that really challenge people's beliefs. This is really vague, but this is kind of the direction that I want to continue going.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the long-term goal for yourself, Isabel. I don't think you mentioned that.
It's a very stressful question because I have not really thought long-term. The most long-term I've thought about for this podcast would be 1 year at a time. So, of course, continue doing what I'm doing. And at the same time, I'm also trying to make this a fun experience for myself, despite having to maintain this podcast. So I've been sort of experimenting with some other content types, different mediums. So I would like to try to have more fun. I've been doing a little bit more TikTok style videos, which is a format that I'm not in any way familiar with because some of you guys might know TikTok is not available in Hong Kong. And it might be banned.
Soon, not America.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. So it's just oh, yeah. And
glad I never learned that.
I know. In terms of money, I don't even dare to say I want to break even because it's kind of too big of a goal currently. But if there's any way to just make $1 out of this podcast,
what's your Venmo, Isabel? We'll send you $1.
I take any forms of donation, and if anyone wants to partner with us, please consider Proudly Asian. And before we wrap up, before we go, I just have one question for you guys for fun, and this is going to spark another debate. Which coast is the best coast?
Oh, it's easy. This is not even... Is this a question? This is not a question, right?
I don't
think
know.
it's that
East Coast.
easy? You think it's that easy?
East Coast America. It's that easy.
If you like cities, if you like seasons and cities, I would say New York, Boston are great. But if you like I live an hour away from Napa, 3.5 hours away from Tahoe. I'm 10 minutes away from the beach. We're a small city out here, but we have some diversity, not as much as New York, I'll give you that. But we have diversity, but we also have diversity of landscape. If you want to be alone, Lingjie, how far do you have to go to be away from people?
Who the hell wants to be alone? Come on. If you want to be alone, we all have closets with the door that's like partially open. We can just go inside into the closet and just fall asleep there, and you can be alone. The whole point of it. Okay, the main thing I say is food. If you want good food of all varieties, come to the East Coast.
Sure. Yeah.
You can't beat food compared to where he is right now. I mean, we all have to survive somehow. We all have to get calories in. It's the most important thing. Forget the views. Forget the travel part of it. Food is life.
Yeah.
You make it sound like we're in the desert and we're eating the seeds and the bark that I was talking about earlier. We have a few restaurants out here too, Lingjie.
Dude, I've been to your Chinatown. I went to San Francisco was the last place I went pre-COVID, just before it all hit, and I did not have a good time.
Chinatown is struggling. But that's not the only place to get Chinese food, Lingjie.
Yeah, New York is the other place that you can get Chinese food. Come here. Easy peasy.
Yeah, or if you want
I can close my eyes, spin in a circle, point in some direction, and there'll be a good restaurant there.
Interesting. I can't wait to visit New York, seriously.
Yeah, come to both, and Isabel can be the judge.
Have you been to New York, Isabel?
I've never been. I know one thing that's waiting for me in New York is this bottle of Dom P. So I know that's for sure.
Please explain to the listeners.
I don't know what kind of food
Please
I'll
explain
get.
to the listeners because they have zero context for that.
So it's kind of like an ongoing inside joke between me and Lingjie in the sense of like he made this really kind offer saying that whenever I stop by New York, he will actually take out one of his stash of Dom P from his
From my cellar downstairs in the basement.
Exactly. Like he's actually chilling one for me right now for me to visit, and that's the kind offer. So
that is a real offer. I've said this to you personally. I probably said this on air somewhere. That is a real offer. Dom P is not that expensive.
Yeah.
There's
it's
no
just a couple
backing
$100.
it. It's not
fine.
that expensive.
It's fine.
Isabel,
wow.
if you come out here, I'll take you to five different wineries, and we can taste all day.
Oh my god. I'm gonna get so drunk.
Just a tasting. You don't have to drink the whole bottle. We'll just do a taste.
Yeah, and like Curtis, you did offer like an egg tart.
Absolutely.
Come on, guys.
Yes,
Egg tarts or a bottle of Dom P.
Yeah, but enough of the inside joke. I think our listeners are probably falling asleep right now, hearing about.
I don't think we have any listeners left.
I know, right? All the travel plans that Isabel has. But yeah, before we go, one final question for you both. What does it mean to be proudly Asian American to you?
Oh, just maybe just being yourself and being okay with that, and not trying to be anything other than who you are, and living your ancestors' dream by just living, being alive and thriving and getting your voice out there. I think just having the platform and the ability to tell stories.
Cool.
He partially stole my answer, but it's along the same vein as that. Just being comfortable with whatever level of Asian that you think you are, whether you're non-speaking of your language, whether you're fully fluent in it, or whether you've lived actually in your country for a couple years or not. Just being comfortable with whatever level of Asian you are is probably the best thing, because we all lose happiness when we compare ourselves to other, even if you're just comparing your proficiency in your language to someone else that you might know that's also Chinese or that's also Korean. That takes away from your own enjoyment of your own culture. So being able to enjoy your culture and be happy and content with yourself at whatever level of Asian that you are, I think that's what it means.
Wow. Thank you so much for joining us for this podcaster therapy session.
I'll send you the bill later. None of this is free, by the way.
Oh,
No,
man.
You're using my video software right now.
You put a lot of app placements here. I'll also send you separate invoices. That's it for this episode of Proudly Asian. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at proudly.asian for more content. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Leave us a 5-star review on wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and signing off for now. I'm Isabel Wong.